Hello, students. I just decided to record some information over this slideshow talking about understanding inference and logic and pragmatic outcome evaluation and assessments, just because it is one of the things that I have found that can be so detrimental to your research. And so I just wanted to emphasize this as I go along and talk on these slides. So first of all, inferences and logic are cognitive processes that occur so automatically that we take them for granted. That is one of the problems with research. So sometimes we'll go into an organization, and the organization can say something like, let's just say, "Oh, I'm having problems with my staff coming to work late," and immediately the evaluator starts thinking, "Oh, they're um, coming at a time in the morning where there's a lot of traffic." That might be one. They may say, "Oh, well, they might be having a problem with parking. Maybe there's not enough parking spaces for the staff, so they're coming in late." It may be that there's a problem with the time clock, and that might be why they're coming in late. But you get a lot of different ideas about how that might be. These are the inferences, the assumptions that we might have when we're starting out a project. However, the problem can be unrelated to any of those things that you normally would connect to somebody coming to work late. It could be connected to a major um, um, job that's being done in the community, a renovation or something like that. It could be that they just haven't, maybe there's a power outage in the morning and then the alarm clocks aren't going off. There, so you can't make the kind of assumptions when you're first starting out. You really do have to gather data to figure out what the problem is. So in the beginning phases, inference and the logic work together to help you plan the study. You're going to start thinking about some areas. So you can say, maybe it's this, and this, even before you collect data. So you'll kind of know what kind of data to collect. But at the same time, keep your mind open because the answer could be totally unrelated. So inferences and logic also keep the researcher focused on the problem or the challenge that needs to be studied. Don't get distracted by other things that might creep in. So what are we talking about when we talk about logical? The logical that What do we mean when we say we are logical about an assessment or an evaluation? So, like again, like inferences, logic occurs all the time and primarily automatic. So, for instance, if you wake up in the morning, you look outside and you see wet grass, you pretty much know that it rained, either that morning or earlier. You don't think that some giant came out of the sky and dumped water all over the place or anything like that. You think of the most logical rationale. You don't think snow melted or any other illogical or something. You think of what would normally be something that would lead you to this conclusion. So inferences occur all the time, and this is primarily intuitive. So you hear a conversation, and your experience, your maturity, your training, your education, everything leads you to think that certain things are happening. So, or that these things are connected. So when a client says something to you, you also interpret what that client says. Now, sometimes it needs to be more clear. So, for instance, a client may say something like, you say, "Hey, how are you doing today?" And the client says, I'm okay." But you see this client regularly, so this is their usual response, so you don't think anything about it. But if this is usually a client that's more talkative that stops and say, "Hey, I'm glad you asked me. Let me tell you what I just did this week." And the client doesn't say that, you can make some intuitive assumptions about the client's behavior in that moment. So you want to think about, when do you need specific information from the client or the responders in your research, and when can you make some inferences about some things that they've said. Let's say you get 6 clients and they all said, oh, everything, the food was really good today. You pretty much know what really good means. You don't have to have a specific, you could probably use a Likert scale and say from 1 to 5, how was the food, if that's what you're surveying or something like that. But for the most part, you can make an inference about that particular thing. And so there are times when inferences and assumptions are good, but there are times when you make inferences and it can actually throw you off and skew the data. So you have to be very careful about this area. And the problem with it is that if you make an inference, you can select the wrong variable or make the wrong hypothesis based on what you think you saw or what you think was happening. For instance, in this picture, let's say you walked in to an organization and the organization said, "Oh, the problem is that I'm not getting enough productivity out of my workers." And you see this, and you immediately make an assumption that this person is asleep on the job. Then from that, you move on and say, okay, then I need to find out, what does their workload look like? Maybe they're overworked. How many clients are they assigned, and so forth. And you start moving on that direction. And the truth can be that you made the wrong assumption from the beginning. The client, the staff person wasn't asleep. They were angry because their computer just broke down, and they stopped, and they were just, this is the moment you saw them. So now, while you're out looking for a large casework load, or the staff people being overworked, or they're just, the workload is not evenly distributed. The issue, it might be their technology is outdated. It could be anything. So inferences and logic can sometimes be misleading. Be very careful, because you'd hate to base your whole evaluation on the staff is overworked. And so you got all these places that you're going to look and find that the information, and you might actually find that the staff is overworked, but that is not going to solve the problem that actually exists in the organization. If the problem is technology, you might find, in other words, the breadcrumbs can lead you to a problem that does exist within the organization, but it's not directly related to the problem that you observed or that the leaders reported to you in the beginning. Be very careful that you're following the right breadcrumbs to the right question. So you have to be precise in identifying the very specific data that you're going to collect to solve the problem. Who's going to provide it to you, and for what period of time are you looking for? Are you looking at the last year, the last 5 years, the last 30 days, the last 6 months? And what are you actually going to collect, and from who? And it needs to be directly related to the problem that you're solving. You have to determine how much data do you need to solve this problem. If you look at, if the let's say if it's tardiness to the job, and you collect data from the last 6 months, but the problem had been going on for a year, then you need more data. Or you may need to go back. If the problem occurred 6 months ago, you may need to go back 6 months before that and see what was going on before that, so that you could compare the data. So all of these pre-implementation and pre-planning decisions are the things that you need to be very, very specific and careful about, so that your evaluation or assessment actually measures what it needs to measure to resolve the issue that you're trying to resolve, or that it is able to measure what you're looking to measure to see if it is effective. Errors in planning can nullify your entire assessment. Now, I was at Barry University. We were planning we were in our dissertation planning phases. We were doing our proposals. And one of the previous students came in to the class, and she was talking to us about the work that she was doing, that she was actually in the data gathering phase for her project. And she explained what the project was to us, and then she started talking about the data she was collecting. And we had a couple of questions, and by the time we finished asking the questions, she realized that the data she was collecting was not going to answer the problem that she wanted to research. She had to redo her entire proposal because it was not going to give her the information that she was looking for. So I'm telling you that this is a critical area. That's why I decided to make this little video. So the results of the plan have to be directly connected to the problem that you were studying. For example, you've got a child care agency that is experiencing a continuous increase in employee tardiness when they return from their lunch breaks. So you immediately started examining the lunch schedule. You started interviewing staff about where do they go for lunch and how long do they have and what is the problem. And you did all these other records to try to see why these people were tardy. So that led you to the assumption, while you were doing all this work, it led you to the assumption, you gathered the data, and you realized that something happened 6 months ago. Something changed, because now all of a sudden these are the same people who are working there. The lunch breaks didn't change, nothing changed, but something happened, and now they're coming back to from lunch late. So now this is the logical result of that preliminary work. So now, once you get this, you say, okay, now I know something happened. Let me go back and look at what happened 6 months ago that changed. What you find out is that a local deli that was in walking distance closed down. So people who were going there for lunch can no longer go there. They had to go further, or they had to bring their lunches, or they had to do something else for lunch, order lunches or whatever, but it was causing this problem. So now you can decide, okay, how can we resolve this? Well, let's say you find out there's another deli that's a few blocks away, and you suggest to them that they contact that deli and see whether they'll take email orders. Like first thing in the morning, everybody can email their lunch orders, and then a courier can deliver it and collect the money, or they can prepay it or something. But some kind of way you are eliminating the problem so that you can have a pragmatic solution. So this is a much better resolution than if you were going back and saying, oh, the problem is we need to change their lunch schedules, that we have too many people going to lunch at the same time, or we need to make sure that the people don't go out to lunch. They have to stay in the building for lunch or something like that, because now you're solving a problem, but not because of something that actually existed. You're giving a solution, but it doesn't solve the problem that existed. The problem that caused this was the deli closing down. So you can make some assumptions, but you have to do the data collection to make sure you're on the right track and following the right breadcrumbs. So sometimes your research will lead you to an assumption that something has changed. Again, in this, that caused the recent tardiness. And so you concluded the rational solution was to address the thing that changed that caused the tardiness. So it was the deli within the walking distance. So now, as a researcher, you have to remember you cannot get distracted by unrelated solutions. You have to make sure that in the work that you're doing, each question that you're asking will lead you directly back to the problem or the issue or the program that you're researching. You don't want to get off on all these little tangents. And so you have to make sure that you're asking the right questions, gathering the correct data from the correct people during the correct time frames, which will give you the information that can lead you to a solution. Okay, just wanted to reiterate that to you. Some of it is going to be intuition, and you can start making some drawings, making some assumptions, but you have to test it against the data that you're receiving or the data that you're going to collect. Otherwise, you can be going down a rabbit hole for a long time. And this is another reason why a lot of people are ABD, all but dissertation. They've done everything except for their work, their research work, because they got distracted. They spent all their resources investigating one thing and it was something totally different. So don't be afraid to spend a lot of time in your planning and pre-planning stages when you're asking the questions that are directly related to what you're trying to solve or investigate, evaluate, or assess. Thank you. That's it.